China's new foreign minister lashed out at the United States at a news conference in Beijing today. He criticized U.S. policies towards his country and warned of conflict if the U.S. doesn't change course. The U.S. State Department, however, says the Biden administration has no plans to change its approach to China.
The United States does not seek conflict. The United States seeks a relationship with the PRC that has a floor, that has guardrails, and that ultimately is a relationship that has measures in place to prevent competition from veering into conflict. That has been the core focus of our engagement with the PRC since the earliest days of this administration.
The CBC's Magda Gebrselassie has been following developments today in Washington. She has more on the growing tension between the United States and China.
China's foreign minister is warning the U.S. to change its attitude towards China, and if not, he says it could lead to a confrontation. Now, tension has been rising between the two countries for years because of a number of issues, from trade to Taiwan to Russia. On Taiwan, China claims it is part of its territory. The U.S. says it recognizes the One China policy, but it also supplies Taiwan with weapons, as Taiwanese officials continue to raise the alarm over China's military activities near the island. Then there's the year-long war on Ukraine. While the U.S. and others continue to condemn Russia's ongoing aggression, China's ties with Russia remain strong. And while the minister said that China hasn't supplied any side with weapons, he also questioned the U.S. selling arms to Taiwan, while also warning China not to give weapons to Russia. Then there's the balloon that flew over the U.S. and was shot down. U.S. officials say it was a Chinese spy balloon. China still says it was a weather balloon that went off course. And today, the foreign minister accused the U.S. of overreacting. He said that the U.S. has a distorted view of China and warned that, quote, if the United States does not hit the brakes but continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing or a crash, and there will surely be conflict and confrontation. Reacting to all of this today is a spokesperson for the White House National Security Council.
If we seek a strategic competition with China, we do not seek conflict. And there is nothing about our approach to this most consequential of bilateral relationships that should lead anybody to think that we want conflict. In fact, everything that we're doing is in keeping with the president's guidance that we aim to compete and we aim to win that competition with China, but we absolutely want to keep it at that level.
He says there's tension, but no change to China-U.S. relations. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Washington.
So what would an escalation look like between China and the U.S.? Let's discuss that with Ross Babbage. He is a non-resident senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments, a nonpartisan policy research institute in Washington. He spent 16 years working as a strategic analyst and defense planner for the Australian government, and we're reaching him now in Potato Point, Australia. Ross, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
So how concerned should we be about the threat of a conflict, a confrontation, in the words of the foreign minister, between the U.S. and China?
Well, I think it's a fairly likely possibility. Let me put it that way. Perhaps it's an even bet, some would say. The core reason is that the regime in Beijing has made it very clear on numerous occasions that it plans to take complete control, if necessary, to actually invade Taiwan. And this is something which the United States and its allies, and of course the people of Taiwan, do not want. But we're in a situation where Xi Jinping himself has promised on numerous occasions now to his own public that this is, I think his own terms are, this can be done and must be done. So he's very definite about that. On the other hand, we've had President Biden 4 times since his election make very clear that if China assaults Taiwan with military force, then the United States will be directly committing forces. And if the United States is committing forces to defend what is really a vibrant democracy and will be fighting for its life, I have great difficulty believing most of the other democratic allies will stand by and let that happen, and certainly the Japanese won't, They've made that clear. And my personal view is that Australia won't, and I think a lot of other countries will be there with the United States to help defend Taiwan.
So, Ross, I mean, what you're painting a picture of a conventional war. I mean, is that what you believe is really kind of on the line here in the foreseeable future?
Well, I'm actually painting a picture which, if it happens, this will actually be even more complex than that. Certainly, there would be conventional military operations in the Western Pacific on a substantial scale. And for the first month or so, they'd probably be very intense indeed. But there'd probably be several phases in such a conflict, and it would probably not be over quickly. But in addition to that, the Chinese are clearly developing and have developed capabilities to reach into each of the allied countries, to manipulate information, to conduct cyber operations, to prepare. They've prepared, we believe, the possibility of sabotage operations and other activities if conflict, open war breaks out. So really, this is the first time, arguably, since the Second World War, where the Allies would face a situation where they couldn't just contract out the fighting of a war to their militaries on the other side of the world. This would be a situation where the homelands would be heavily involved, and it would have big impacts on our societies, on our economies, on just about everybody, actually. And we'd need to adapt very rapidly to do things we haven't done for many, many decades.
Why? Why does China appear to be taking this route?
Look, I think it's partly it's been an aspiration of the Chinese leadership now for several decades, but under Xi Jinping, it's become more than that. It's really now such a commitment that he has made to his own people and to the party that it's the regime's legitimacy really, to some extent, stands on whether he actually achieves this goal. So to some extent, you could argue he may be feeling a bit sort of cornered. On the other hand, he's clearly been working on a whole raft of things to make this work. The military expansion has been very substantial over the last decade, but even more than that, he's done a lot of other things to make the economy, the Chinese economy, largely immune from most of the external economic pressures it otherwise would be facing. So we now have a different sort of China, if you like. Xi Jinping has worked very hard to build much greater self-reliance in the economy, in the society, including in terms of domestic security, to make sure that foreigners and foreign entities can't interfere with it. And on top of that, he's built the military up very, very substantially. And now we have a situation where he's coercing with military intrusions almost daily now into Taiwanese space. So this is very serious, and there have been a number of assessments made about the probability in the next few years. I personally think it's a serious, very serious risk, and the Allies need to be very well prepared for it.
So what do you think should be done to try and mitigate or maybe stop this from happening? What should the U.S. and its allies do?
Look, I think there are some things already well and truly underway. There has been a lot of work already done to strengthen the military presence of the Americans and others in the theatre, to disperse and protect them, because they're at the moment highly concentrated on a small number of bases and facilities. They're working very hard to disperse and protect themselves and make sure that they can survive the very large barrage of missiles that, if a war breaks out, they're expecting, and I would expect too, in the first couple of days in particular. On top of that, there's a lot of other things that can be done to build up our resilience domestically, to build up our capacity to thwart interference in our societies. This is a very important thing that the Chinese work at doing, to undermine the cohesion and undermine the information flows within our societies that we rely so much on. And that's information manipulation, but it's also manipulation of the internet traffic, a range of other things, and certainly cyber operations as well, to disrupt actual systems in terms of everything from water supply to the general electronic support that we all rely on daily. They've developed very substantial capacities to do that. They've tested a lot of this already in fairly benign ways so far in most respects. But they have nearly 1 million people committed to these operations, to conduct operations of these natures into allied countries. And we're not very well prepared for that. And we really need to strengthen our defences to cope.
Ross, appreciate your insight tonight. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Ross Babbage is a strategic analyst and defense planner and the author of The Next Major War: Can the U.S. and its Allies Win Against China?